Johnny Mack is in the house. A lot of football to get into. Eagles mandatory OTAs. He has all of the Eagles news and notes up on our website after each and every OTA practice. You can check it out all right there at 973ESPN.com and follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. He joins me now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline as Eagles OTA mandatory mini camps continue. John, that is something interesting, though, because there is a lot of conversation around the league about the mandatory mini camps, and you brought it up yesterday, something that Michael Bennett said, and there's a lot of holdouts, and, there's been some debate back and forth about this, and, a lot of players are electing to say, you know what, I'm not doing the mandatory mini camps because I'm not happy with my contract. And there's been a long debate about NFL contracts. They're not guaranteed. We know it. But where do you sit on the way that the players sometimes handle not showing up for these mandatory things when they agreed to these contracts? You might say I'm underpaid now, but at the time when you signed that deal, you did agree upon it.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I don't have a problem with it because there's far more contracts that are not lived up to from the other side on a year-to-year basis. In other words, ownership can get rid of you as soon as all the guaranteed money is done. So technically, they've signed their contracts. Players don't have a ton of leverage. So if you're Julio Jones or Khalil Mack or Earl Thomas, you kind of weigh, basically you're fined $85,000, a little bit less than that if you miss mandatory minicamp. And for those guys, that's not that much money, and you can send a message and say, look, I'm underpaid, I've outperformed my contract, and see what happens. I mean, again, they don't have a ton of leverage, so I never argue with them using what little leverage they do have, and this is a little bit of leverage they can sort of exert on the other side.
Isn't it? I mean, I get it. Like, okay, they're in a situation where they feel they're underpaid, and how do I make a stance or make a statement, short of just saying, hey, guys, I'd like to talk about my contract or I feel like I'm underpaid, because typically, you're – very infrequently is your boss going to come to you and say, great job, we're going to give you more money.
Exactly.
Like, that just doesn't happen. It's never happened to me anyway.
Yeah, and the worst part, you're right, obviously, but the worst part of that is, obviously, if something does happen and you underperform the contract, they're releasing you. They're not thinking about it. So
right, but my point is this. Isn't the tree to be barking up with the players' union and not your team?
Yeah, that's a legitimate point. I mean, you would want to go to D. Smith and say, look, we got to negotiate a better deal. But, I'm one of the few people who will defend D. Smith at times. I think he got a lot done in that last collective bargaining agreement that people don't talk about. One of them is no contact in the off season. One of them is the limitations, and that the players don't have to be here all the time, and their quality of lives are so much better, and they can only be at the facility 6 hours a day when they're here for OTAs, things like that. Nobody talks about that, but it's very important for the players and from a player's perspective. Ultimately, it's a tough system when you talk about guaranteed contracts, and there's really only one in the entire NFL that's fully guaranteed, and that's Kirk Cousins. Rookies tend to be fully guaranteed for those first-round picks for 4 years at least. But the reality is the injuries and the nature of this game, everybody has it backward. And I write about this every year during NBA free agency because people do the same thing. They say, how can NBA players make so much, NFL players make so little? Well, there's 15 NBA players, there's 53 plus practice squad, plus guys on injured reserve. So part of it's a math equation. But then the second part is the fact that you do have so many injury problems in the NFL is the exact reason you can't have guaranteed contracts. Not the reason you should, because you can imagine, I'll use Teddy Bridgewater as the most obvious example. If the Vikings had signed him to say a long-term extension where it was looking like he was going in his career, say $20-25 million a year. Then that injury happens. Then they got to pay another quarterback $25 million a year. It's a hard reality, but that's the injury part of this game is the reason guaranteed contracts don't exist.
Right. No, and I get that. I mean, obviously there's got to be some sort of, middle ground. Like, all right, so what? The Rams and Aaron Donald, they're not talking. He's not happy with his contract. I've heard Schefter talk about it. Hey, he's making a lot, like $1.5 million. We understand that he's underpaid, but at some point he said, okay, I'll take that deal. So you're penalizing your team for an agreement that you made. I get the whole I can't give you the guaranteed deal because you could get hurt and that whole aspect of it, but it seems that there's got to be some middle ground that they can come to say, hey, the first
– Well, and you're right about, say, a guy like Aaron Donald. Well, rookie contracts are now slotted, but they're slotted for a reason. And that was kind of pushed off so veterans could make more money. So under the old system, and you go back to Sam Bradford, who was the last number one overall pick, you had these massive, massive contracts for these unproven rookie players, which would take away from the veteran players who had proven themselves. So it became a question of who deserves the money more, the veterans
right,
who've earned it, or the rookies are going to be on that rookie scale for 4 up to 5 years if you're a first-round pick. And that's the trade-off they made. I actually agree with that trade-off. I think
I agree with that too.
Obviously, a veteran player who has proven himself deserves more than an unproven rookie.
No question. I agree with that, and I like that the NBA has it slotted, that the football, the NFL has it slotted too. But what I don't like to see is a veteran player that says, hey, look, I'm not making enough money, so I'm going to penalize the rest of my team for a contract that I agreed to. I can understand if you say, look, I'm not happy with you could certainly get it out there that I'm not happy. I think I'm underpaid, and I think most people would take your side, but the fact that your way to display it is to now not show up because you're not happy, now you're penalizing the rest of the team.
Well, I think it's sort of, we kind of talk about it. I don't think off-season work is all that important for veteran players. I don't think, say Julio Jones needs to be there in Atlanta. So they do use it. Now, if you start talking about training camp, then I probably agree with you. And that's a bigger issue if you hold out to that degree. So I don't have a problem with guys trying to send a message at this time of year. And it comes down to the individual. You're right. Contracts in all sports, not just the NFL, are about timing and opportunity. And we constantly talk about the quarterback position.
Yep.
And you saw it over the past couple of years. Derek Carr was the highest paid quarterback in football, and the first to hit $25 million. Well, is he the best quarterback? Obviously not. But it was his turn. Then Matthew Stafford was next. Then it was Kirk Cousins. Then it was Matt Ryan. None of those guys are the best quarterbacks in football at any point in their careers, but it was their turn. And that's just the way it works, and it works that way at other positions. When Earl Thomas signed his deal, and I think 2013, he was the highest paid safety in football. But then the next guy's up, and the next guy's up, and the Harrison Smiths of the world, and now he's underpaid. That's just the way it works. And if you're a player, the reality is you have a short window to make a lot of money.
Yep.
And you got to take advantage of it.
I understand that part of it too. And look, it's just so odd that I read these things sometime and the guy has a deal that at one point he was probably thrilled to have, right?
Oh yeah, well, Earl's a perfect example. When he signed that deal, he was the highest paid safety in the history of the National Football League.
This whole notion though that I have to be the highest paid because I'm the best player. Well, at one point you were. We did think you were the best, and we gave you the highest. Just because time has elapsed, you buy an iPhone 2, over time the iPhone 4 is now better. You don't just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but from his perspective, It's the reality of it's not only he's entering the final year of his deal. So you have that lame duck aspect. We always talk about coaches and general managers. You never want to have them entering the final year of their deal for reasons. Obviously, it's never good to give a message to a locker room that a coach may not be here the next year.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with players, except they want to know where they're going to be. They don't want to play that lame duck year. They want some security, whether it's in the city they're currently in or if you're going to move on in the next city. And it's so that's kind of what usually the way it happens. Very rarely do you see renegotiations or restructured deals as far as raises go. Very rarely do you see them until that lame duck year.
John, Eagles minicamp today, you write about the kickoff's going to look very different. How's it going to affect Philadelphia?
Well, it's to be determined, which both Doug Peterson and Dave Fipp admitted this week. And I think the whole league is sort of watching everybody else. And preseason's going to be big from that standpoint because everybody's going to see who does it best and who adapts the best, and then it becomes a copycat game. And it from what the NFL has done basically is tried to turn it into more of a punt-like play in that there's not going to be the high-speed collisions. Guys are going to be closer together, and you're going to have to run down the field together and then start blocking. And I thought, the most interesting development today, you think about normally the upbacks blocking on a kickoff are big guys. They could be offensive linemen. They could be linebackers. Today was Mike Wallace and Nelson Aguilar as the upbacks on kickoff returns, which kind of tells you the difference in how people think this play is going to look and how it's going to unfold.
That's pretty interesting because we know the Eagles do have a weapon in that game too, right? I mean, you got the punt game anyway. You got Sproles. Are they going to? You think they use Sproles in that game still?
Well, I asked Doug that yesterday specifically, and he said they haven't had those discussions yet. And I asked Dave Phipps, and he said similar things, but they're going to wait and see how things sort of develop in August. And I said the preseason games and see how the play is. If ultimately it comes into what they think it's going to be, and they think it's going to be a punt-like play, as I said, then I think Darren enters that conversation.
Right, because if they make the kickoff look more like the punt, now Sproles becomes even more of a weapon.
Yeah, and a short area quickness. Normally, if you think about punt returns versus kickoff returns, they're a lot different. And kickoff returners usually had the great long speed and the ability to break a tackle and then sort of go if you can get a wedge. Punt returns are completely different. You need that short area quickness to make the first guy miss and then go from there. So a lot of ways it's completely different returners, completely different players. But if we become similar, hey, there's very few who are better than Darren Sproles in a punt environment.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple other guys, Mike Wallace, Nelson Aguilar, as the upbacks here. How are they looking? I saw something from Carson Wentz about Mike Wallace, about how good he looks in person, but him and Aguilar, Nelson, was the surprise. He was the guy at this time last year that everyone was raving about. Is he still looking like he's ascending? And how does Wallace look in this offense?
Well, I think Nelson has sort of gotten over that hump. I think he's sort of like, and it's amazing how much he's come in just a year's time. He's like a given. He looks like a high-level NFL player. And if you asked me this at this time last year, I probably would have laughed at you. But he just plays with confidence now, and he looks like the guy the Eagles thought he was going to be when they took him in the first round. I think if you look at one disappointment, to me, he's probably sort of settled into that slot role. I still don't think he's all that effective playing outside the numbers. But the Eagles have guys. I mean, Alshon Jeffrey, not healthy right now, coming off the shoulder surgery, but he'll be ready to go in training camp. And also Mike Wallace, as you mentioned, Rich Carson was raving about his speed today. I mean, that's the one thing about Mike Wallace. He can just run by everybody. Always has been able to do that. Even though he's getting older, can still do it. And as I said, if you want to compare, look, Mike has been a disappointment in certain stops because they've always wanted him to be a number one receiver or at least a high-level number two.
And you can make an argument that he didn't have the quarterback to bring out the best in him.
Well, that too. But here he's the third or fourth guy.
And he's got the quarterback to bring out the best in him.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're talking about who do you cover on this team, well, first you got to deal with Ertz and Jeffrey, then you got to deal with Aguilar, then you got to deal with Wallace. And that's pretty difficult if you're down to your third or fourth best defensive back trying to deal with Mike Wallace. So, hey, it's a big upgrade over Torrey Smith. He's just a much better player.
Check it in on Eagles OTAs. Dallas Goedert, I mean, he was the top pick, second rounder here. You said he continues to be a star, 6'5", 260. I wonder how, you said you got to contend with, all these guys. How much are you going to have to contend with him?
Yeah, I asked Doug that today because it's going to be interesting. I mean, you only have one football. You only have a certain number of skill position people on the field at once. And the Eagles, like every other team in this NFL, the modern NFL, plays 11 personnel, which is 3 receivers and 1 running back the majority of the time. And they have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. So it's going to be interesting to see if he develops and he's able to get on the field quickly. And Doug talked about him having to see him in training camp and the pads on and see if he can handle the physicality of the position. But, man, he's explosive and he's long. And you start to ask the questions, well, would you rather have Dallas and Zach Ertz on the field and take Nelson or Mike Wallace off?
Wow.
That's sort of the question you're going to have to ask. And I think, if he can block even a little bit, I think he's going to make those decisions more difficult than they seem right now.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. I know we touched on Sidney Jones yesterday, but apparently he is, he's going to be done for the rest of the offseason? Until training camp? Yeah.
He's done, and obviously the rest of the offseason is tomorrow at this stage, and then it's done. And the Eagles, Doug said he's dealing with some soreness in his lower body, so Pete's not there, but he went hockey on us with lower body injury. But he made sure to say it wasn't the Achilles. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's clear the Eagles are being very, very cautious with him. And they shut him down last week in OTAs. So when it's all said and done, he will have missed the last at least 5 practices that we've been able to see in the media. And you have to start asking your questions. I mean, there have to be legitimate questions. The guy played 1 game last year. So if you're counting on Sidney Jones at this stage, I don't know if you can feel comfortable doing that.
Interesting question was brought up by one of the reporters today about the future of Lane Johnson. I mean, you got Jason Peters coming back. Vaitai, they didn't move Johnson last year. And I guess the question was asked whether or not they view Lane Johnson as a right tackle for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, Doug didn't say that emphatically, but I talked to Jeff Stoutland enough and last year when, remember, Jason got hurt, and there were all the questions brought up there. Do you move Lane over? But they feel Halapoulivaati Vaitai is better suited on the left side. He's more comfortable on the left side. He proved himself on the left side. So, and then the second part is all the changes in the NFL, and you saw it last year with the Eagles' schedule, and how many great pass rushers were on that side of the football going against Lane Johnson, Khalil Mack, Von Miller, and DeMarcus Lawrence again and again and again, pass rushing from that side. So I don't think the difference between right tackle and left tackle is what it once was in this league. And Lane feels more comfortable on the right side. Vitae feels more comfortable on the left side. So there's no use shaking that up.
Yeah, and Vitae is a guy I guess apparently, they like is if Jason Peters were to get, go down again, they feel pretty confident that Vitae would be, right there back and ready to kind of step in there. And I guess that
I called him a starter today.
Well, and that shows that they didn't really try to find a left tackle in the draft either.
No, they have a lot of confidence. I mean, by definition, he's good enough at left tackle to win the Super Bowl. I mean, he played left tackle through the end of the half of the regular season, all throughout the playoffs, and then the Super Bowl, and they won the Super Bowl. So, by definition, he's good enough to win with at left tackle. Now, he's not Jason Peters, he's not Lane Johnson, but again, he's good enough to win with, and he feels comfortable on that side. So, if Jason were to retire next year, for instance, he would be the left tackle. Lane Johnson would be the right tackle.
Now, Lane Johnson, opening night, Thursday night, he'll be the left tackle?
No, he'll be the right tackle.
No. I'm Jason Peters. Jason Peters, I mean.
Yes, he will be the left tackle. And Doug's quote today was he has earned the right to play as long as he wants to. There is no player on this team that has more respect than Jason Peters. And I mean, it goes down from the owner, Jeffrey Lurie, who calls him his best friend, to the head coach, all the way down to the players who, kind of talk about Jason Peters like they're fans. He's got so much respect amongst his peers and the people that run this organization. And Doug said it succinctly today. He plays as long as he wants to.
And no joint practices this year. That was kind of shot down in a quick no. Why? Because. All right, let's move on.
Yeah, people speculated that they're playing the Patriots in week 2 of the preseason so that they would go up to Foxborough. Worked out with the Patriots in the past, and some people were excited by that because you'd have a rematch of the Super Bowl on the practice field, but not going to happen.
All right, John McMullen at JF McMullen. Follow him on Twitter, and also check out his NFL coverage at GetMoreSports.com, where there's a lot of NFL news happening, a lot of quarterback stuff with the rookies that is kind of interesting, including in New York with the Jets, in Arizona with the Cardinals, the Andrew Luck stuff. So we got plenty more NFL news and notes to touch on the rest of the week right here on the Sports Bash. He appeared via the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mike.